بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين وخاتم النبيين محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. Respected listeners, yesterday we spoke about Surah Al-Ankabut today and Surah Qasas. Today we're going to speak about Surah Al-Rum and moving forward on the 21st juz. The Surah Al-Ankabut actually goes into the 21st juz, but we spoke about that section yesterday anyway. So we'll move on to Surah Al-Rum. Al-Rum meaning the Romans. This was a Meccan surah and it contains 60 verses. At the end of Surah Al-Ankabut, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given glad tidings to those who strive and struggle in His way. And Allah had promised that He would open the doors for them and that they would succeed. Now, this story, it's a manifestation of that actual help, that divine help that Allah has promised. It's a manifestation of it. And the backdrop to the surah was that I'll translate the first three verses. Alif Lam Mim, وَغُلِبَتِ الرُّومُ, the Romans have been defeated in the near land, and they, after their defeat, will be victorious within a few years. Now, what happened was, this was a war that was fought between the Romans and the Persians. Both disbelievers, had nothing to do with the Muslims. However, the people of Persia were fire worshippers, whilst those of Rome were Christians, people of the book. And so naturally, the people of Rome were closer to the Prophet ﷺ and the Muslims in that way. That's why even when the Prophet ﷺ wrote his letter to Hiraql, what did he write? تَعَالَوْا إِلَى كَلِمَةٍ سَوَاءٍ بَيْنَنَا وَبَيْنَكُمْ, that come towards a word which is similar between us and you. So they had that closeness or similarity between the two groups, the Muslims and the Romans. And the Persians, on the other hand, they shared an affiliation or a similarity with the Meccans, who were idol worshippers. Now, what had happened was, this was when the Prophet ﷺ was still living in Mecca, that a war was fought in Syria, and whilst the Meccans, they aspired for the victory of the Persians, the Muslims wished that the Christians would win. But what happened was that the Persians defeated the Christians, and in fact it was a very big blow, and they conquered the land right up to Constantinople and built a temple there for worshipping fire. It was inconceivable that they would be able to have a comeback. I mean, the Romans had been defeated so badly that one couldn't imagine how they could come back. And it said that the first few years of Hiraql in power, these were very difficult years for him, and the Romans were crippled. Now, after this battle, the Meccans, they began taunting the Muslims by saying that, look, our brothers, the Persians, look how they defeated your friends, the Romans, who have similar beliefs to you. So they began taunting the Muslims. So then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed these verses. That غُلِبَتِ الرُّومُ, yes, the Romans have been defeated, فِي أَدْنَى الْأَرْضِ, in the near land, وَهُمْ مِنْ بَعْدِ غَلَبِهِمْ سَيَغْلِبُونَ, and they, after their defeat, shall be victorious in a few years. So when these verses were revealed, Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiyallahu anhu, he went to the Meccans, and in the marketplace he announced that there was no occasion for them to be happy, because after a few years the Romans would defeat the Persians again, would defeat the Persians. Now, Ubay ibn Khalaf, he was one of the leaders of Mecca. One of the chiefs, he said, no way, this is impossible. You're saying a lie. So Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, he placed a bet. That I'm willing to bet on this, that if the Christians do not overcome the Persians in 3 years' time, then I'll give you 10 camels. Now, Ubay ibn Khalaf, again, as I said, the defeat to the Romans was so bad that it was inconceivable that they could have a comeback. So Ubay ibn Khalaf said, fine, this bet's on. Now, Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, that even though this bet was a gamble, however, gambling hadn't been prohibited until then. Later on, when Allah revealed the verses prohibiting alcohol, that's when gambling was prohibited. So, Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, he went to inform the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, look, don't say 3 years because Allah hasn't fixed the number of years. And he said, fi bid'i sinin, in a few years, which is anything between 3 and 9. So go back and extend the time to 9 years, but say 100 camels. Meaning, go back and say that rather than having this bet that the Romans will defeat the Persians within 3 years, say it will be within 9 years. And if you lose, say that you're willing to give 100 camels. So Ubay ibn Khalaf, he agreed on the terms of the new terms of the bet. We learn that this happened about 5 years before the Hijrah. Now, after 7 years, during the Battle of Badr, so whilst Muslims were here fighting the Mushrikeen in the Battle of Badr, the Romans at the same time, they defeated the Persians. And Ubay ibn Khalaf had died by then. So Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, he demanded these 100 camels from his family. And they had to be handed over. Now, again, and this is what Allah refers to when He says, وَيَوْمَئِذِ يَفْرَحُ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ بِنَصْرِ اللَّهِ. And on this day, the believers shall rejoice through the help of Allah. Meaning, what help did the believers receive if the Romans defeated the Persians? This is because at the same time, the Muslims defeated the Meccans in the Battle of Badr. So this was a double victory for the Muslims. Number one is that those who they had a similarity with, the Romans defeated the Persians, and the Muslims, on the other hand, they defeated the Meccans. This defeat, when the Romans defeated the Persians here, this actually completely crippled the Persians, and in fact, that was pretty much brought an end to them, to their empire. When Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu was given the 100 camels, he took them to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that give them away in charity, because by then, he said, هذا السحت تصدق به, this is prohibited, give it in charity. Now, even though this wasn't actually prohibited for Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, because the terms of the bet and the actual bet itself had taken place at a time when gambling wasn't impermissible. However, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he wanted Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu to do this because of the higher expectations and the lofty example expected from Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. And often the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam would do this, or this would be expected from the Sahaba radiallahu anhum and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So those who were closer and who had higher positions, their expectations would be higher. Now, after Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about this, remember this is a Meccan surah, so the topics are often very similar to the other Meccan surahs. Allah speaks about how the Meccans, they know about the things of the worldly life. However, in relation to the hereafter, they are completely unaware, or they take no heed. And they think that their understanding or their mastery over the affairs of the world is going to be of help to them. However, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to clarify that. No, the hereafter is that which is important. Allah speaks about the creation of the... and He asks them that ponder over the creation of the skies and the earth and that which is between. And not only what you can see in front of you, but even explore and see what happened to those who were before you. You know, they were stronger than you. They had more wealth than you. Their properties were even larger than yours. And the messengers came to them as well. But then they refused to believe, and as a result they were punished. And not only were they punished, but in the hereafter, their punishment will continue. And Allah mentioned some of the scenes of the Day of Judgment. However, those who accepted the Prophet and accepted his message, whichever Prophet it was, then these will be rewarded. And Allah says that they shall be in gardens. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us a way to achieve these rewards by glorifying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, doing His dhikr. And there's a verse here mentioned, Allah says, فَسُبْحَانَ اللَّهِ حِينَ تُمْسُونَ وَحِينَ تُصْبِحُونَ وَلَهُ الْحَمْدُ فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَعَشِيًّا وَحِينَ تُظْهِرُونَ. So proclaim Allah's purity when you come to the evening and when you see the morning. And for Him is praise in the heavens and in the earth, and in the afternoon, and when you enter the time of dhuhr, when you enter the time of dhuhr. And in fact, there's another similar verse. Well, there's a verse of the Quran where Allah says, وَإِبْرَاهِيمَ الَّذِي وَفَّى, that Ibrahim was the one who fulfilled his covenant. Some of the ulama say that this particular verse was the tasbih of Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam. فَسُبْحَانَ اللَّهِ حِينَ تُمْسُونَ وَحِينَ تُصْبِحُونَ وَلَهُ الْحَمْدُ فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَعَشِيًّا وَحِينَ تُظْهِرُونَ. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He says that Ibrahim alladhi waffa, meaning Ibrahim was the one who fulfilled his covenant, it was because Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam used to recite these words in the morning and in the evening. And in another hadith, the Prophet ﷺ also says that whoever says this, and then he adds on, the Prophet ﷺ adds the verse after this as well, يُخْرِجُ الْحَيَّ مِنَ الْمَيِّتِ وَيُخْرِجُ الْمَيِّتَ مِنَ الْحَيِّ وَيُحْيِي الْأَرْضَ بَعْدَ مَوْتِهَا وَكَذَلِكَ تُخْرَجُونَ, meaning that He brings out the living from the dead and brings out the dead from the living and gives life to the land after it is dead. And in a similar way, you will be brought out. Prophet ﷺ says that whoever will recite this in the morning, all shortcomings in his acts during the day will be repaired. And whoever will recite these verses in the evening, all shortcomings in his actions during the night will be repaired. So often we worry about whether our actions are being accepted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is one way to have those shortcomings repaired. Then after Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has spoken about the battle between the Romans and the Persians, Allah also declared that one of the reasons why the mushrikeen and the disbelievers, why they didn't accept the guidance of the Quran, the message of the Prophet ﷺ, was because of their excessive love for this world and their ghafla, their neglect and heedlessness of the hereafter. Then any misgivings regarding resurrection are clarified, and Allah speaks about how people will be brought back to life again. And then Allah instructs them to look at themselves and look around them and look at the people of before and see how these people had fared when it came to the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then Allah speaks about some of His creation, and then it's clear that after all of this, there must be a God in the world, that controls all of this. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives examples and signs of His divinity and of His being the creator and God. Allah says, وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ خَلَقَكُم مِّن تُرَابٍ ثُمَّ إِذَا أَنْتُمْ بَشَرٌ تَنْتَشِرُونَ. So from here, you have a list of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's signs. So He says that from His signs that He created you from clay, then so you are human beings scattered around. So one of the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is He created man from earth. And earth, man aims to be haughty and lofty in this world, yet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds us of what our origination is. And if we look at the different, the four well-known elements of water, fire, air and earth, the water, fire, air are seen to be superior. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decided to create us from earth. In fact, this is one of the reasons why Shaitan refused to prostrate before Sayyidina Adam alayhi salatu wasalam, because he said that you've created him from clay and me from fire, and I have been created from a more superior element. Then another of these signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the creation of a partner. Allah says Allah created your wife. مِنْ آيَاتٍ خَلَقَ لَكُم مِّنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ أَزْوَاجًا. And from His sign is that He created for you wives from among yourselves, so that you may find tranquility in them. And He has created love and kindness between you. That both man and woman are created from the same matter, yet there is a world of difference in their build, appearance, looks, character, habits, everything. So this in itself is another sign from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Another sign is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about the different races that people have and the different physical features. And here Allah says, and amongst His signs is the creation of the heavens and the earth and the difference of your tongues and colours. And in another verse of the Quran, Allah mentions this and says why He's done this. إِنَّا خَلَقْنَاكُمْ مِنْ ذَكْرٍ وَأُنْثَى وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلَ لِتَعَارَفُوا. O people, we have created you, man and woman, and we have made you from different valleys and tribes so that you recognize one another. And again, the qualities, or let's say the matter and the parts of human beings are the same in the general sense, that they have tongues and faces, but then all of these are all different. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created that even though we speak using the same a'dha from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but then the voices sound different, whether it's across children or across adults. Even then the voices, they sound different. So this in itself is another sign of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah then speaks about the sign of the night and day, and how the night has been primarily reserved for rest, whilst the day has been reserved for working. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about the flash of lightning, that even that in itself is a sign from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why? Because following that, rain comes along. And then the final side Allah mentions here is about the existence of the sky and the earth. And when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will command the breakup of this system, then this arrangement, which has been working for thousands of years perfectly, will end up gone, just by the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then Allah says that, look, these signs, if these signs aren't enough, let's look at it from a common sense point of view, that you ascribe partners to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if you look at, let's look at your servants and the people the slaves that you have. They look similar to you, appearance, the makeup of limbs and other physical features, yet you don't give them an equal share in your power. You're not willing to part with the slightest part of your wealth or power in favour of your subjects. And they can't spend your wealth like the way you spend it. So if you're afraid of having them as your partners or equals, then how can you then ascribe partners and equals to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and those being angels or Allah's creations, meaning at least you and your slaves are equals in many ways, but these angels and these other people that you ascribe, or other objects that you ascribe to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they don't even have any comparison with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, so when we have established that there is no basis for this shirk, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala instructs the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam and the believers as a result, فَأَقِمْ وَجْهَكَ لِلدِّينِ حَنِيفًا, then set your face to the faith steadily. Hanifa meaning abandoning all other different types of false deities. And this is what was one of the attributes of Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam. Kana ummatan qanitan hanifa. He was known as Hanifa, meaning he had abandoned all other false deities. So this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, that once we've established that these shuraka and these are false, so then establish your direction towards the true deen, the true religion, by abandoning all false deities. And then Allah says, فِطْرَةَ اللَّهِ الَّتِي فَطَرَ النَّاسَ عَلَيْهَا. This is the nature of Allah upon which He has created man. The word fitra has been used here, and I've translated it as the nature. The ulama have given this to mean two different things. Some ulama have said that this means that the word fitra here means Islam, and this is also there's a hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he says, "Kullu mawludin yuladu ala al-fitra," that every child who is born upon fitra. Then فَأَبَوَاهُ يَهَوِّدَانِهِ أَوْ يُنَصِّرَانِهِ أَوْ يُمَجِّسَانِهِ. Then his parents either make him into a Yahudi, a Nasrani, or a Majusi. Now, some of the ulama have taken this meaning to be fitrah, meaning Islam, that every child is born upon Islam. This is often why people don't, when a person accepts Islam, people say that you shouldn't call them convert, you should call them a revert, because they have reverted to their religion of Islam because they were already a Muslim at one point, which is when they were born, and then they left religion. But then when they turn back to religion, they say that rather than calling them converts, we call them reverts because they've reverted to Islam. That's on the understanding that the word fitrah here means Islam. However, there are some difficulties and challenges and questions when taking this meaning, because after this Allah says, "La tabdila li khalqillah." There is no changing to the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the ulama have given different explanations of this. So for example, if the meaning is taken to be Islam, and then Allah says, "La tabdila li khalqillah," there is no changing to the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. However, we know that many people turn away from Islam, meaning they don't carry on as Muslims. So then there is a change to that initial khalq, to that initial creation, if we take the meaning to be Islam. So many of the ulama have taken the meaning of fitrah to mean a disposition to an ability to recognize Allah. That's what the meaning of fitra is. Nature, meaning naturally we all have the ability and a disposition to be able to recognize Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and reject evil. So people are born with that inherent quality. But then how we move forward is influenced by who we have around us at the time. So as children, the people we have around us, they will influence. So not only, and even though the hadith suggests that فَأَبَوَاهُ يُهَوِّدَانِهِ أَوْ يُنَصِّرَانِهِ أَوْ يُمَجِّسَانِهِ, that his parents will either make him into a Jew, Christian, or a Majusi, but it's not just restricted to that, because again, the influence a child has around him or her will direct or guide their way in many other ways, such as their actions, their behavior, their character. All of these are developed based on the influences we have and the environments we grow in. So, but if we take this meaning the word fitra to be a natural disposition or a natural ability to be good or to recognize Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then this la tabdila li khalqillah, we can still, it still makes sense, because what that means then is that even then if a child, for whatever reason, due to external influences, doesn't remain a Muslim or goes down an evil path, they still will have that ability to return, because that inherent quality that Allah has placed in each person, it remains. That will never go. So in that, so the ulama say that then it makes sense to have this understanding of the word fitra, and not for it to mean Islam, but rather a natural ability to discern and to be able to recognize Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about some of his signs again. He speaks about about some good deeds that people should do, such as establishing of prayer, giving zakah, and so on. Allah speaks about the creation of the earth, and some more of his signs are mentioned. Allah says, Allahu alladhi yursilu riyaha, and Allah is the one who sends the winds. And in another verse of the Quran, Allah says, وَهُوَ الَّذِي يُرْسِلُ الرِّيَاحَ بُشْرًا بَيْنَ يَدَيْ رَحْمَتِهِ, and 'tis He who sends the winds as a source of glad tidings before the coming of His mercy. I remember my beloved teacher once explained to us, and he said, often if you watch these, if you see where you have animals, and often it shows that in hot weather, when they are looking forward to, or sometimes they're in need of rain, and this can be more clearly understood probably not by us because we live in the cities, but then in villages where, especially in Asia and places like that, where people rely on harvest and crops and so on, and the rain and the weather is really important for them. So they would often come out, and even we learn about the stories of the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba radiallahu anhu, that often they would come out to see if there would be if any rain was coming. So they would look for clouds. But for animals, often what they do is you'd see them that they would pause for a short while, look around, and then scatter into their holes and their burrows and in their little caves. And then the rain would come. And this is what Allah means, that from his signs, وَهُوَ الَّذِي يُرْسِلُ الرِّيَاحَ, and it is he who sends the winds. These animals, they sense that wind and they feel that wind. And this wind, it comes before the coming of the rain. So when they sense the wind, see, or else how do they know to scatter and to go away into their holes and their burrows? There's no way of them knowing that the rain is coming. It's not as if and if we see the images or the videos of this, it doesn't show them looking into the sky. It just shows them at a moment of alertness. And the reason for this is that they sense and they feel that wind. Once they feel that wind, they realize now that the rain is coming. That's why they rush into their holes and their burrows. And then the rain comes. So this is what Allah means. Bushran bayna yaday rahmatih, that this wind is a glad tiding before the mercy of Allah, meaning the rain of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Near to the end of Surah Al-Rum, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about the creation of man. We then recited Surah Luqman, and the beginning of the surah begins with mention of the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, how it is a source of guidance and mercy for those who do good. And then Allah lists some of the qualities of the people who do good, such as the establishment of prayer and the giving of zakah. And then there's a verse where Allah says, وَمِنَ النَّاسِ مَن يَشْتَرِي لَهْوَ الْحَدِيثِ لِيُضِلَّ عَنْ سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ بِغَيْرِ عِلْمٍ. And from amongst the people there is one who buys the lahwa al-hadith, distracting amusement of things, so that he may mislead others from the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and make a mockery of it. Now, one of the reasons for the revelation of this verse, that there was a man by the name of Nadr ibn Harith, and he was one of the top businessmen from the Mushrikeen of Mecca. He used to travel to different countries. And once he brought back a collection of historical stories from Cyrus and other Persian kings from Iran. So with these, he came and he said, look, Muhammad tells you stories of the people of Ad and Thamud. I should tell you better stories, those of Rustam, Isfandiyar, and other kings of Persia. And so they started listening to his stories because they felt that his stories, they were interesting and there was no work to do. We didn't have to establish prayer, give zakah or anything. So they started to listen to his stories. And some of the mushrikeen of Makkah who used to actually sit to listen to the Quran because, it was a miracle, the Quran itself, they actually started to now go and sit with this Nadr ibn Harith. And according to another narration we learn, Nadr ibn Harith, he actually brought a singing bondswoman with him, and she would sing, and then he would tell the people, look, why do you go and sit with Muhammad when you can sit here and listen to her sing and enjoy the music? So this verse is mentioned here. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about the creation of the skies and the earth, and then the topic moves on to Sayyidina Luqman himself. Now, who was Luqman? Allah says, وَلَقَدْ آتَيْنَا لُقْمَانَ الْحِكْمَةَ أَنْ يَشْكُرْ لِلَّهِ, that we gave wisdom to Luqman. There are different narrations. Some suggest that he was a nephew of Sayyidina Ayyub alayhi salatu wasalam. Others say he was his brother from his maternal aunt. There's also a narration that suggests that he was an Ethiopian slave, and many other narrations and the words of the ulama have supported this, that he was an Ethiopian slave who worked as a carpenter. Once when Sayyidina Jabir ibn Abdullah radiyallahu anhu was asked about his background, he said he was an Ethiopian slave. He was an Ethiopian of low height and he had a flat nose. And was he a prophet? The majority of the ulama say that he wasn't a prophet. And there's actually one narration that suggests that Allah had actually given him an option between wisdom and prophethood. And he chose wisdom. However, if Allah had given him prophethood, he said that he was willing to accept. And however, the majority of ulama, they accept, and their understanding is that he wasn't a prophet. Now, in fact, there's one narration that suggests that before the time of Sayyidina Dawood alayhi salatu wasalam, so he lived for long, so even he was related to Sayyidina Ayyub, but he lived until and carried on during the time of Sayyidina Dawood alayhi salatu wasalam. And it said that he used to give religious rulings during the time of Sayyidina Dawood alayhi salatu wasalam, but then when Sayyidina Dawood alayhi salatu wasalam was given prophethood, then he stopped doing it. And some say that he was a judge amongst Banu Israel. Now, he would give advice to the people once he was addressing a large gathering and was sharing his wisdom with them. And a man came to him and said, "Look, aren't you the same person who used to graze goats with me in such and such a forest?" So Luqman said, "Yes, I am the same person." The man said, "Then how can you achieve this status that all of these people come and respect you and they listen to you?" So then Luqman alayhi salam said that the reason is because of two things that I do. Number one, tell the truth, and number two, avoid those things which are useless. If he wasn't a prophet, then it's possible that where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, where it says that he received wahi or Allah spoke to him, and this was similar to the inspiration that was given to the mother of Sayyidina Musa alayhi salatu wasalam, which you mentioned earlier. Further into the surah, Allah speaks about the wisdoms and the advices of Luqman. Allah speaks about the rights of parents, especially a mother, and how a mother spends after conception, how she carries a child in her womb. And then even then it doesn't finish, where she feeds the child, looks after the child and so on. But then even then, despite the hard work of a mother, Allah then still says that if then they work to make you ascribe partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then don't obey them. But then even then Allah says, but treat them in a good manner. So even if a person's parents instruct them to do wrong, they're still obliged to respect them. Then there are a few different types of advices that Sayyidina Luqman alayhi salatu wasalam gives. And, things like belief, so do not ascribe partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, correcting one's deeds, about social responsibilities and social manners, he gives some advice regarding that. So, for example, with regards to social manners, 4 prohibitions are mentioned. Number 1, when talking or meeting with people, then to turn one's face away arrogantly, walking arrogantly on the earth, to be moderate in one's walking, and then the prohibition of talking loudly. So these different advices of Sayyidina Luqman alayhi salatu wasalam are mentioned. Allah then speaks about his nizam of the world and how he has placed different things for the smooth running of the dunya. At the end of the surah, Allah instructs us to remain, to adopt taqwa, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the Lord of everyone and Allah's knowledge is infinite. And that's mentioned here at the end of the surah. I won't go into it, as ulama have spoken a lot about this, we just don't have time. We then recite Surah Sajdah, Sajdah meaning the prostration. Again, this is a Meccan surah. The beginning of the surah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in which there is no doubt. And then the instruction to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that his role was to, so Allah says that Islam, revelation of the book wherein there is no doubt, is from the Lord of the worlds. And then some of the things that the Meccans would say, or is it that they say that he has fabricated it? On the contrary, it is the truth from your Lord, so that you warn a people to whom no warner has come before you. Maybe they take the right path. And I've mentioned this before, that the period between the time of Sayyidina Isa and Sayyidina and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was a period of fatratul wahy, that the wahy, and it was a period of fatra in the sense that there were no messengers had come in that time. Now the question is that if no messenger had come, and so what would be the state of the people who had believed, meaning in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? So even if a messenger doesn't come, but then the messages were there from the previous Anbiya alayhim salatu wasalam. Now, there were a number of people noteworthy who are mentioned, and again, even in the ahadith they are mentioned. So, for example, the Sayyidina Sa'd ibn Zayd, he was the son of Zayd ibn Amr ibn Nufail, and Sa'id ibn Zayd, not Sa'd ibn Zayd, Sayyidina Sa'id ibn Zayd, he was the son of Zayd ibn Amr ibn Nufail. So he said to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that, you know my father, he had adhered to monotheism and he rejected shirk. So can I pray for his forgiveness? So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, yes. For him, the prayer of forgiveness is permissible. On the Day of Judgment, he will rise as a community of his own. And it's also said about Warqa bin Nawfal, who was present during the initial period of the prophethood. However, and he had expressed at the time that he would help the Prophet ﷺ, but he died. So again, him as well, he would inshallah be from that category of people who will be saved. Allah speaks in the surah about his creation. He speaks about doing good and refraining from evil. There's mention about Salat Tahajjud in the sense that those who, there's a verse mentioned here, that their sides remain apart from their beds. They call their Lord with fear and hope. And the ulama have said that this verse refers to Tahajjud Salah. And we learn from the ahadith that Tahajjud Salah is a powerful tool to obtain the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but also from one's prayers to be accepted. It is also mentioned about Sayyidina Musa alayhi salatu wasalam in the surah. Surah Sajdah, again, it's a Meccan surah. The topics are very similar, reminders of the past, the reminder of the hereafter, and how one's good deeds will save one from the punishment of the hereafter, and so on. We then recited Surah Al-Ahzab. Inshallah, we'll continue with that tomorrow. May Allah give us all the ability to understand. Subhanakallahumma bihamdik, nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk.